Great, we're going to get started now. I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Matthew Bremen. I'm the Global Director for the GYEO 2030 initiative. Making Sense is excited to have FHI 360 today, a leader in the economic development and youth space. And this is a second of our five lead GYEO 2030 solution sessions. To provide some context for these solution sessions, since 2007, Making Sense has been convening the Global Youth Economic Opportunities Summit to share learning, develop partnerships, advance economic opportunities for youth. The inequities that COVID and social justice movements have exposed have increased the need to accelerate change, particularly for young people. And it's really become a turning point for the GYEO Summit agenda. We're transforming our approach to fully include young people alongside adults in our activities to ensure youth are co-designing solutions to their own problems and not just serving as window dressing on panels. We're going to be expanding the dialogue beyond just Washington, D.C. and the U.S. and seeking to host and support convenings around the world, such as this one, engaging young people and adults locally to discuss solutions to SDG 8 in particular, relevant in their context. During 2021-22, we're going through a series of events that you see listed here on this slide. They're youth dialogues, they're solution sessions or webinars on key topics of interest, such as this one. They're convenings, regional, global convenings. They're a series of near-term activities that are designed to share the latest GYEO program lessons and gain commitment from actors globally to advance good practices within a common language and framework of the SDGs, and specifically to achieve SDG 8. Which for those who aren't familiar, it's to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. We also plan to establish global convenings as annual touch points to track progress toward achievement of SDG 8. The next slide, I want to thank you, our partners, for their financial and in-kind contributions as we embark on this new initiative. It's really exciting. I specifically want to recognize Palladium, our global session partner, along with FHI 360 here hosting today, and CRS, who are regional session partners. I also want to acknowledge our first two local partners, LALA, the Latin American Leadership Academy, and the African Skills Hub. There are organizations joining every day, so please let us know if you're interested in committing to GYEO 2030. So today, we're excited to hear about the potential for green jobs and how young people can gain meaningful employment from them. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Deborah Kennedy from FHI 360, who will provide opening remarks for today's session. Deborah, over to you.
Thanks so much. Good morning, all. FHI 360 is honored to collaborate with Making Sense International to host this webinar for the Youth Economic Opportunities Summit. Our focus on green jobs is part of a broader environment and climate change initiative at FHI 360, which is focused on addressing and combating climate change and, importantly, helping communities to adapt. We started this initiative in Asia, driven by the urgent needs and the opportunities foreseen by our FHI 360 regional office in Bangkok. And this year, we are expanding these pilots to other parts of the globe, looking at different challenges and continuing to adapt. Working with local organizations and communities, we're adapting approaches and resources to respond to the global call to be more green. We recognize that environment and climate change programming, including green jobs, cannot succeed without a steadfast commitment to working across disciplines, facilitating new forms of collaboration among diverse local stakeholder groups, and designing interventions based on the evidence. I know I'm looking forward to today's webinar, which is designed to bring together experts from across the globe to unpack the future of green jobs for youth, looking at both opportunities and challenges for youth. There's, according to the ILO, there's an estimated 24 million new jobs that could be created by 2030 as a result of a transition to a greener economy. We want to make sure we listen to the youth voices, the leaders of the next 2-3 decades. And so it's very important today, and I'm so pleased to see that we will have a youth voice on the panel. Titar Nain, our policy advisor at Tant Myanmar today to represent those views. As underscored at COP26, there's a great urgency to addressing climate change and to supporting youth and adults to participate fully in the green economy. So good to be here. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Always a pleasure to be introduced by FHI 360's leadership, an organization that obviously many of you know I've been affiliated with in the past prior to becoming an independent consultant in economics, innovation, and human capital, now based in Maputo, Mozambique. But want to send a warm thank you to all former FHI 360 colleagues and the hosts of this session. I'm extremely pleased to be here. I think it's an exciting session, and I'm gratified to see that it is, in a virtual sense, as well attended as many sessions in the past at the Global Youth Economic Opportunities Summits in person. I would ask that all the panel members turn their cameras on so we can see them throughout introductions. Much appreciated. So we're going to have brief remarks, and after introductions, we'll dig into the meat of what I would say is a real mouthful of a session title addressing environment and climate change, empowering youth and rebuilding economies, the role of green jobs, which I think most of us are abbreviating green jobs and youth, which is much shorter. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. In order of the slide, we'll start with Alec Hansen. Alec Hansen is a senior economist with FHI 360 based in Tunis. He is an eminent expert in cluster-based economic development, having worked directly with at least 6 green clusters and up to 50 globally in his long career in the field. Alex, can you give a wave or not? So thank you, Alex. Alec, Jason Katre is the Philippine country lead at the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter with Habitat for Humanity International. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Phil.
Our third panelist and our youth representative is Titar Niang. Titar is currently a policy researcher with NGO Tant Myanmar, working on issues related to recycling of plastics, or recycling and upcycling of plastics. And she is also a final year student in international relations at the University of Yangon. Correct, Titar?
Yes,
right.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you for joining us, and we're glad to have you represent. Aki Kim is a macroeconomic and employment policy specialist with ILO, the International Labor Organization based in Geneva. And he is also the primary author of the ILO's major report on green jobs, which he'll be introducing us to in a moment. And finally, Basim Salah is a CEO of Green Tech Jordan, representing the private sector voice and as a renewable energy developer, in addition to an incubator of youth talent through a very novel program that I hope we'll hear more about, orienting middle income and lower middle income youth into entrepreneurship opportunities in the environment. So thank you all for joining us today. To our panelists, we're going to go right into the substance of these questions, as I've warned you all. And I'd like to direct this question to everyone, and we'll go through in no particular order, probably starting with our youth representative and then taking flight from there. But I'd like to ask, from your perspective, what are the 3 most important imperatives to realize the potential of green jobs for youth employment? This can include ensuring youth are active participants in the creation of green jobs, obtaining meaningful employment, entrepreneurship. But I'd really like to get quickly to your key priorities. What do you think is important, most important, in realizing the potential of green jobs for youth employment? Titar, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, for me, first of all, I would like to say, I would like to clarify one thing, that I am still I am still no expert on the climate change or the employment. So I have to say that what I'm going to say is going to be based on my personal experience and what I've seen in my community. So yeah. So first of all, I think the first thing that we need to consider in the youth employment today, I think is really important to consider the challenges that the young people are facing today. Because as you know, I'm currently an international relations student and a final year student. So it is quite frequent that I hear a lot of challenges facing the youth today in finding a job and things like that. In here, I think it would be relevant to talk about my experience a bit here. Because right now I'm a final year student, and the schools here have been the university have been closed for more than a year now since the pandemic started. So yeah, we started to find job, and so there are 26 students in a 26 students in a course. So I have to say that only a few of them, including me, are officially or formally employed at the moment. So I have to say that, so looking at this, I have to say that there are a lot of challenges that the young people are facing today in finding jobs. And sometimes I hear things like there are unrealistic job requirements. And for example, very high year of experience required even for the entry level jobs, or sometimes I hear difficulties there are unfavorable payments or unfavorable working conditions. And I also hear that some of my friends complain about employers who are not willing to take in new young people, because they think that the young people are inexperienced. So there are a lot of things that I hear on the perspective of young people in finding jobs today. So yeah, so first of all, I think it would be very important to consider these challenges today if we really want to open more opportunities for the young people in the future. So that's the first thing. Another thing I think is skills that we need to consider, because currently, of course, we are talking about green job, and the job market is constantly changing and developing. So there are new skills required in the job markets every day, and it's constantly changing. So we need to keep up. We need to keep up with the skills that are required in the job market. So we really need to think about. We really need to assess what kind of skills, that they can be employed, so that on-job training that they need, so that they can get employed. So yeah, and the last thing I think is important is, I have to say, the employer's attitude. Well, that's another challenge that people frequently face today, that I frequently hear from my from my friends and the young people in my community. In here, most of the young people, we are likely to have, how can I say, low level of experience, I have to say, in a professional experience. So in here, there are some, how can I say, attitude in among the employers that they think that the young people are not experienced enough, so that sometimes young people are not getting employed because of that. Instead of that, I really think that it's also important to consider that part, because if the employers are not really open to take in more young people in their team, young people perspective, the young people's opportunity for job will not be much more open, I guess. So yeah, so for me, if I have to wrap up, three most important imperatives for me would be like challenges in finding job. The second one, the skills required, and the third one would be the employer's attitude. Yeah.
Thank you, Titar. Let's go directly to an employer. Dr. Basim, I'd love to hear your three most important imperatives, having just been challenged that some employers' attitudes may be a barrier to youth in realizing the potential of green jobs for youth employment and entrepreneurship, I should mention. Dr. Basim, what are your three imperatives?
Thank you, Phil. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. We've been actually studying this issue for the past couple of years as part of developing the incubator that you mentioned, Phil, in your introduction. And we looked at global strategies like the Global Water Partnership Strategy, the Swiss Water Partnership, the UN Youth Engagement Strategy, and the African Governance Architecture Youth Engagement Strategy. And we also surveyed over 100 young women and men from around the Mediterranean. The three things that came up were to empower, to build capacity, and to facilitate engagement of the young. To empower through political dialogue, inclusion, decision-making, giving them seats on legislative, regulatory, and government decision-making panels, and listening to their priorities. Empowering youth networks by giving them financing and just making them visible within society. Build capacity both through formal education and practical training. And for us, this is specific to climate related action, mitigation, adaptation, because that's really the focus of our incubator. And facilitation of their involvement through, again, giving them the ammunition needed for their local engagement, the financial support needed. And it doesn't have to be through grants. When you create an entrepreneurial climate, then they can pitch their ideas to real investors. And if they are based on market demand, then these should be viable, bankable ideas. So the idea is to just give them the venue to seek such financing. And this is what we've been working on. So the three things in summary is empower, build capacity, and facilitate the engagement of the young.
Dr. Basim, can you also put your green tech hat on and talk a little bit about whether there are differences in those imperatives from your perspective as an employer who is, actually doing direct project development?
So look, I think that the only thing that I should focus on here as a potential difference is pragmatism. When I look at engagements by donor agencies and even sometimes governments, I think that they focus on short-term gains, just counting numbers of beneficiaries, counting objectives, key performance indicators. And these engagements end with the end of the program, unfortunately. They don't build on previous successes. They don't learn from previous mistakes. So when I look at job creation, it should be something based on pragmatic, market-driven, sustainable, future-looking rather than past-looking design. So for example, when we look at job creation through our incubator, we definitely look at the nexus between water, energy, and food as a climate adaptation and mitigation mechanism. For example, disaster risk reduction and management is a potential business opportunity with what's happening now. So anyone, a young woman or man who can come up with ideas that can alleviate such risks, can sell such service to governments, local governments, or regional or central federal governments. These are things that we direct young women and men to look at. Just be pragmatic. Theory is good, but it's always good to look at sustainability through profitability, and this is always market-driven.
Great. Now, I will mention everyone is welcome to say a few words about where they're coming from to these imperatives. So, stating your perspective is part of the question. Jessen, I'd like to go to you next. From your perspective, and maybe you can explain just a few words about where your perspective is grounded. What are the three most important imperatives that you're seeing in terms of realizing the potential for youth, for green jobs, for youth employment?
Thank you, Phil. So I'll be explaining where I'm coming from. I'm with Habitat for Humanity International. And we do have our innovation unit called the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter. So we're very much private sector focused and market systems based. And then when we talk of green jobs, we really approach this from a green industry perspective. And when I talk of industry, we really are in the construction industry, specifically in the housing, residential building sector. In the Philippines, our Philippine government in 2016 actually signed a law to create a green economy and green jobs. But that law, as is common to most of the laws in the Philippines, are in paper and needs to be implemented and put into practice. So for us in Habitat, it is the imperative is that the whole construction industry, which is one of the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, move to greener processes, technologies, and material and jobs. That for us would really be making the whole housing industry more vibrant, inclusive, sustainable. Now, as Habitat, we really focus on those that are excluded in the low-income families, and not only in the low-income families, but those in the informal segment of the housing industry. So most of the attention, most of the investments, and most of the innovation in terms of greening the whole industry is at the higher end and at the middle end of the segment in the country. What we hope to happen and work with partners to do is move this downward to the lower segment of the society and economy and move it sidewards to the informal segment as well. And so that's the second imperative here, Phil, is really framing it to be more inclusive, right? The third imperative for us is when we say housing, we really we really look at it from a chain perspective, a value chain perspective, starting from the raw material, from extraction to design and manufacturing, to construction, to usage and recycling. And in each of all those phases, critical are material, technology, financing, but I would say equally or more importantly are the skill sets needed. And skill sets to be provided by construction, by artisans basically, those who will design and those who will manually do. So, and in the Philippines, being a very young country, youth is very much important to be involved in this one as well. So those are the three imperatives that we see to move
Okay,
the
so
conversation forward.
the first I didn't get. Can you succinctly summarize the first, just so that we have
The
it?
first is the construction industry is one of the biggest emitter. It needs to really greenify or move greener.
Okay,
So that's
okay.
one.
Okay, so focus on construction, become more inclusive, and approach this from the value chain perspective, from a construction-centric, skill-centric perspective. Great.
Yes,
Okay.
and then the second imperative is make it inclusive.
Inclusive,
Focus on the lower segment of the economy and society, especially those in the informal sector. 10% of the laborer in the Philippines are in the construction industry, but that's formal. We don't have data as to the informal segment of it. In the
Great.
incremental builders, there are 1 million potential carpenters and masons needed, and even design skills provider. And then the third one would really to look at it from the chain perspective, Phil.
From the chain perspective with a focus on skills. Fantastic. Alec, you've worked with clusters around the world, both those that are more green and those that are less green, but each of them has a green focus to some extent. So you bring kind of an interesting neither firm level specifically nor high level policy, but really a kind of a meso business perspective. From your perspective and drawing on all of this experience, what would you say the three most important imperatives would be in realizing the potential of green jobs and entrepreneurship for youth? You're muted. I would ask you to unmute.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to start with a personal perspective. I've been thinking a lot about this mismatch between green job aspirations, especially by young people, and the supply of truly green jobs. And a lot of people are complaining that the jobs aren't out there. I mean, green jobs are a derived demand. And if employers don't want to hire people that way, then people can't get those jobs. And it was really brought home to me by my son, who, in his 20s, he had high-tech jobs. He worked with Microsoft and Google, and he ended up at Autodesk. And he quit that job earlier this year to work in a startup that's doing, plastics recycling, mixed stream recycling, and, took a pay cut and so on. And it was because he really just felt that these companies, even though, especially Autodesk had, many interesting individual things that helped the environment and so on, it wasn't systematic, for a company that came from, that part of California. It was kind of shocking to him how sort of fragmented the effort was. And so it really brought it home to me how much these aspirations there matter. And so I think, in the end, we have to realize the imperative is we've got to help companies to recognize that to retain workers, to be able to hire the best workers, they have to be more genuinely green. So that just adds, to the long list of reasons why employers need to do that, but we need policies, social pressure, and so on to keep that up. In terms of clusters, I think I have really been able to see, first of all, in my early work before the green movement really got big, how often environmentally, clean tech initiatives ended up in ordinary clusters, in textiles or what have you. And then I began working on some explicitly green tech clusters, mostly in the US, also in Denmark. I haven't seen many in the developing world yet. There's one in South Africa that looks very strong and genuine and so on. But the movement is increasing, and it's really coming mainly from Europe. I think Europe has really embraced this. And so most of the donor agencies from Europe are using cluster approaches. The GIZ, for example, is doing it very strongly here in Tunisia. And the World Bank has been. The US, much less so, partly because of some early kind of bad experiences with quasi-cluster development in the 2000s. But I think it's a really great way to scale up, scale out, scale deep the clean tech imperatives, because the clusters really are a great way to combine public policy intentions with accelerating private sector awareness and then actions and activities. I think I just want to end with one more. My third item is really more of a perspective than an imperative. And that's, in a way, Michael Porter used to always say that there are no low-tech sectors, there are only low-tech companies. And in that same spirit, I think there are no non-green jobs, there are just non-green employers. I mean, I can't think of a sector where we couldn't have more green jobs if the companies had a more environmentally responsible approach. So I think in some sense, this chase we have to define certain jobs as green, what is the definition of a green job, starts becoming very murky once we go beyond, very obvious ones like, solar panel technicians. Because even, your accountant, if you're an accountant is working on understanding triple bottom line approaches and is helping their clients to use those, that accountant is now green. So it really is, it gets very murky, and there are some interesting approaches we can talk about, like extended social accounting matrices and ways to try to create these categories, but I think it's going to be much more difficult than it looks on the face of it.
Your last point is really to expand our thinking about what jobs are green, to break out of current narrow thinking about that. I mean, that'll pose some very interesting challenges, both in terms of definitions and in terms of statistics and data. But I want to turn to Ki Kim from ILO, who has already contributed to the chat a bit in terms of what green jobs are. We're going to move on to that in a moment. If you'd like to begin addressing that as well, what are you thinking of when you talk about green jobs? I'd be happy for you to start that conversation while ending the imperatives question. But I would like to ask you, from your perspective, from what is very much a data-driven and research perspective, what are the most important imperatives that you see? And if you'd like to, again, embed some of your thinking about the definition of green jobs as you operationalize it in your research. That would be fantastic.
So thanks very much, Phil. Thank you also to Making Sense and to FHI 360 for this wonderful opportunity for me and the ILO to participate in this panel. Let me start with the three imperatives. I think the first is that there is a need, an important need for clear, detailed, and long-term plans for countries for their transitions towards net zero. And these plans need to be supplemented by ambitious, quantitative, and qualitative employment targets, including specific targets for youth. I think at the ILO, we provide technical advice to many countries around the world. So actually, I should mention this before. So my perspective is really from a policy perspective and also a policy perspective in developing countries. And what we do find is, in order to catalyze private investment, is that policies that lay the foundations of policy certainty are really helpful. Are critical, in fact, for specific sectors to grow and flourish. And so, if we want, more and better green jobs, better green jobs really need to have ambitious targets, based on very clear and long-term green economy transition plans. The second, and is very much in line with what Titar mentioned, is that there's a critical need right now to invest in skills. I think it's important, though, that we need to invest in a combination of fundamental, green, and digital skills. I think these are all interrelated. Increasingly, when you talk about, for example, green skills, whether in agriculture or manufacturing, there's a lot of digital skills required, and of course, the fundamental skills. So we really need to invest. And as we know very well, investments and skills really take quite a long time. There's a long gestation period for these, for the benefits to emerge. So really the time to act is now. And I think Tita also mentioned, importantly, that as a result of the COVID pandemic, throughout the world, we've had millions of students, whether in university or lower levels of education, not learning. And so this is even more important as we recover from the COVID crisis. The third imperative, I think is important to mention, is that we really need to manage well a just transition. So I think it's pretty well known, but a transition to green economy can create millions of jobs. I think the other side of that is it will also destroy a lot of jobs. And so you need, at the ILO, we do quite a bit of research with modeling or such, where these can be country case studies. And one thing we do find is that, yes, there's a great potential for job creation, but also there's the other side of it that, some occupations would be destroyed. Some would have to be reskilled to move into other sectors within the same occupation. Some will have to even, to change occupations. So there's this, as in the context of, more upskilling, reskilling, job destruction needed, countries need very good, just transition plans. And these transition plans need to be, informed on the basis of what we like to call social dialogue. But in essence, it's dialogue between governments, employers, and workers. And let me add, of course, when it comes to youth issues, or in fact for any issues, representatives of youth in this case would be critical. But let me also just add that managing well a just transition for developing countries it's not going to be easy financially or technically. So this needs to be supplemented by international cooperation. So let me stop at that, and let me just quickly answer your question, Phil, in terms of green jobs. I think as I mentioned very quickly in the green channel, that in terms of green economy, I think it's the same with green jobs. Countries have different definitions, institutions, different institutions have different definitions. Let me just say at the ILO, where a mandate is to promote decent work, we consider green jobs to be decent jobs that protect and preserve the environment. And so these kind of jobs can be found in the more traditional sectors such as manufacturing, but also in the new emerging sectors such as renewable energy. But I think a common thread is really that they're decent jobs. So when we talk about decent, let me just highlight that there has to be some a respect rights at work, there has to be some sort of, level of job security in order for, for the workers, for young workers and the families to be able to take risks and flourish. There has to be avenues for workers, and including young workers, to raise their voice and, to have their voices heard. And of course, work has to be, fairly paid and productive. And so I think for the ILO, a green job is not just any job. It's really a decent job that restores, protects, and preserves the environment. Thanks, Phil.
Great. Thank you for such a succinct and a powerful statement of agenda there in terms of imperatives. I'd say you've set the bar pretty high in terms of the clarity of those imperatives. I would like to stay with this question of the definition of green jobs. And Dr. Basim, if you could speak a little bit, I mean, to me, do green jobs really look green to the average employer? Do they look different? Do they look like engineering jobs? Do they look like technician jobs? Do they have different mindsets or different skill backgrounds associated? I mean, I think Key has done us a favor by talking about the fundamental skills in addition to green and digital skills. But I'm curious from the employer perspective, what makes a job green? And how does that differ from other in engineering and technician level employment?
Thank you, Phil. Look, I think the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. And if we look at the definition of a green job, I totally agree with Key that, and I just looked it up actually, looking at the US Bureau of Labor Statistics definition. These are jobs in businesses that produce goods or provide services that benefit the environment or conserve natural resources. Now, this is the general definition. When you look at it from our perspective, somebody who is creating jobs, and I am in the clean tech industry, so this is specific to our industry.
Yes,
these are jobs that are created for people passionate to save planet Earth, while at the same time making economic benefit. So we are not a non-for-profit organization, we are for-profit. So any job we create should be sustainable through profitability, and this is important. Whether it's a job, an employment for a person, or whether it is an entrepreneurial opportunity for a young woman or man. So our definition is really tied to their level of passion to fight climate change and be part of the solution, such as Alex's son. I commend him for making this decision, and I think many young women and men are moving in that direction now because they see us, the more mature men and women, failing in our task to save our planet, unfortunately. And I think this goes back to the survey that I mentioned answering the first question. We did ask young women and men about what skills we believe as market, private sector companies, they should have to find relevant jobs. And I was surprised to see the answers. So they said that they should have policy writing skills and negotiation skills. This tells us that these young women and men feel that they're not heard enough. They need to negotiate with us to be able to be heard and to be able to convince us and the policymakers of what needs to be done to save our planet. This is interesting. They also talked about software technology skills, big data analytics, machine learning, etc. So the high tech ability their ability through their skills in high tech to enable change. They talked about a skill which I was surprised to also see many young women and men come up with, translating ideas into action. Again, related to climate change, this is important. They also talked about science diplomacy and how to combine science and governance. Again, they want to be able to go into the decision-making process and influence what the government, legislators, regulators come up with in an effort to, again, affect climate change, directly influence our ability to mitigate climate change. this is them telling us what they think the skills are that they need. In our view, as an employer, we look, as I said, for passion. So I never hire anyone who's not passionate about fighting climate change, no matter how good of an engineer she or he is. This is important. They need to understand basic economic principles. Again, if they want to become an entrepreneur, they need to understand that any job they would create for themselves has to be sustainable, which means it has to be market driven. It has to be based on an economic model that makes sense. And we do help them with the building business plans and executing them. They have to have relevant technical skills. So we don't want someone who doesn't understand renewable energy to work in renewable energy. We don't want anyone who doesn't understand what water irrigation efficiency means to work in irrigation efficiency, but they don't have to be at the 10th level of expertise. I mean, if they have the passion, it's okay, we can take them to that level. And obviously, it's very important for us to look at soft skills, including communication skills, emotional intelligence, believe it or not. We've done surveys and found that it's tied to success at all levels of employment, leadership skills, and attitude. They have to have a positive attitude in everything they do. These are the things we look for. And I think I was working for Microsoft for a long time, and I was running a global program that focused on improving the skills of the sales organization. And we found similar soft skills needed to be able to improve the sales organization for this big 50 company. And I think this applies to all companies all over the world. We have to look for the passion, we have to look for the soft skills in addition to other skills that are relevant to that job. Alec, you're raising your hand. I don't know if I can go to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to comment. You're absolutely right about the BLS definition, Bureau of Labor Statistics definition is excellent. That was defined back in 2013. And since then, the BLS has done nothing with it. They were not able to actually launch surveys on that due to budget cuts, even during the Obama administration. And then, of course, no action during the subsequent administration. So, while we can say something about what we think they look like, actually putting it into practice turns out to be much more difficult. I mean, that's 8 years ago, and the U.S. government doesn't seem to have made any progress. Now, maybe Kim, you could maybe correct that, because I think you're more deep into that issue, but I wasn't able to find anybody who was really doing wide surveys that were actually being able to count those kind of numbers well.
I think there's going to be a divergence here. I mean, in one sense, Alec, you were talking about the need to expand the definition of green jobs to include all of those that are directly or tangentially related. Others see this as a very clear cut. I'm not sure we're going to resolve that today. I think that the more important perspectives as I see them, or two important perspectives as I see them, are one, the employer perspective, which I think Dr. Basim is really represented, but let's get a youth perspective. Titar, what does it mean to you? And we've already heard sort of secondhand the youth perspective of Alex's son. Some jobs just aren't really green enough. But Titar, what, in your opinion, makes a job green from the perspective of a job or an entrepreneurial activity, from the perspective of a young person who's looking to make a contribution to the green economy?
Okay, thank you, Phil. For this question, I think the other speakers have mentioned what a green job means. So I think it has already is already comprehensive. But in here, I think I want to add a common misconception that I frequently see among the young people today, and that is that because that is how can I say, when we normally talk about green job, I think a lot of people, including young people, are most likely to think that it only refers to the job at the environmental organizations like our organization, or WWF or FFI, or that kind of organization, which is solely working on that environmental issues. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That one, that kind of jobs are completely, how can I say, yeah, 100% green job or that kind of thing. But but on the other hand, I think I agree with what Alec mentioned for the previous question. I think green can be in every sector, in many sectors. It is just the employers who are not green. There is no sector that there is not green. In my perspective, I think that any employers and the business owners are willing to make their product, make their production, or make their businesses green is possible. And here, I think the most important thing, and being environmentally ethical, I have to say, in here is, I think it's the most important thing that we should call a job green. So in here, I think it also good to mention about greenwashing, which is something that we commonly see today, because in here, we sometimes, you know, the businesses or the businesses or the organization, they how can I say, they use sustainability only for their image, but their real intention is not really for the environment. You know, they only want the image, like is their product is sustainable, their product is good for the environment, but yeah, when we really dig into their production processes or their business model, it may not be necessarily green. It may not be green as they said they are. So in here, if I talked a lot about this. So if I have to conclude what I discussed, I have to say that the greenness can be found in like many sectors, and the most important thing here, I think, is being environmentally ethical. So yeah, that's how I define a green job. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that helps us kind of with a broader definition. Jason, you have some very specific thoughts about green jobs in the context of the construction industry. And could you talk a little bit about this challenge of getting people to think about construction industry jobs as green rather than blue or brown collar jobs? And before we move on to talk a little bit more specifically about both skills and data, I think two issues that we've touched on. So I want to let you have the last word on
Yes,
what makes
Phil.
it green.
Again, I guess this relates to discrimination in the jobs or employment or skills, right? If it's manual in the agricultural sector, a lot of youth in the Philippines are moving out of agriculture because they see it as not an aspirational employment or enterprise. It's the same in the construction field. Carpenters and masons are seen as dirty jobs, right? They're seen as, in the US, I think the term is blue collar. And youth right now would prefer to go white collar. And when they say white collar, they would go to BPOs, they would go to air-conditioned jobs, or those that they sit in offices. So I think innovation in term culture shift or mindset shift, paradigm shift, in terms of this not being blue collar or this not being white collar, but this being a green collar job would really make efforts to go green more acceptable for Filipino youth, Phil, in the construction industry.
Great. So that focus on the construction industry is an interesting one. And, you know, it also transitions kind of well, I think, into the skills question. The skills question, I think, is a huge, always a big theme. Anytime Making Sense and FHI 360 get together to host a discussion, skills are almost always central. So the question I think that this raises is a crucial one. Are the education and training pathways that are in place fit for purpose in providing education at scale so that youth can access future green employment opportunities and entrepreneurship opportunities, whether we use the narrowest definition or the broader definitions of green jobs that we're talking about? So from this perspective, can you point to any good practices that could be scaled up or that are effective models in preparing youth for green jobs. Let's start with Jessen. Well, he's got a little momentum talking about the construction industry. Have you seen any good examples, or are you participating in good examples of developing youth in that direction?
So we do recognize the importance of workmanship and skills in the construction industry, especially for housing. So we have been working closely with TVETs pre-pandemic, and then when pandemic hit, it really accelerated the business model of TVETs, who are targeting both mainly youth in the academic and non-academic sphere. So we work with them in terms of moving into the, I'm hesitate to use the term fully digital, because this is a manual type of work in the skills, art, carpentry, masonry. The business model that we supported them doing is developing a blended type of skilling effort. When I say blended, combining both face-to-face and remote type of support, because in the Philippines, as is across the world, the digital divide is still very much existing. There is a chasm, right, especially for low-income clients. So that is the business model that we supporting them to do, to shift into a blended type of learning. And this has caught the attention of USAID and the Germans, the BMZ, that they have adapted said model. And now the TESDA, the government's technical vocational institute in the Philippines, would like to do something similar, to use it officially across the country.
Great. So that's a very specific, scalable model, blended learning model aimed at those who might not have the best digital access and therefore might not be very eligible for digital first. Also, the construction industry is inherently difficult to do without some level of practical and face-to-face training. I'd like to get the broadest perspective here, I think, on this question. Kim, what is your view on, I mean, you mentioned the skills as your second core imperative and kind of gave a very nuanced perspective of the kinds of skills that are involved. How well do you think training systems are doing in keeping up? And, you know, are training systems fit for purpose? What needs to happen in that area, and what scalable models might you point to?
So thanks again, Phil. You know, it's a great question. You know, obviously, you know, differs by country, but overall, I think I would have to say that the answer is no, that, you know, they're not fit for purpose. And I think one manifestation of that is actually in the school-to-work transitions. And in fact, at the ILO, we've undertaken a number of studies, including 2 surveys, you know, looking at, you know, school-to-work transitions, not only a transition to the green economy, but broader, just broader transitions. And what we do find is that these school-to-work transitions are very difficult across a range of developing and developed countries. So I think, you know, that is one manifestation to say that you know, there really needs to be more investments in in all levels of education, including technical and vocational training. I think, you know, in terms of, you know, in terms of what needs to happen, you know, I think there's a increase, you know, there's a lot of talk about how employers need to be more involved, and this is a very generic statement, of course, but this thing applies very much to the green economy in particular, because, you know, it is, you know, the employers, you know, who need to be making, you know, these sometimes very large scale, whether, you know, in terms of the energy, or sometimes very small scale, you know, kind of in their working practices, in their operations. And so they really need to be at the country level, you know, much more involved in setting the curricula, and also, of course, in providing work experience opportunities, whether in terms of apprenticeships as such, because, you know, I think as other people have mentioned, you know, the lack of experience is one barrier to more youth employment opportunities. I think in terms of some models, you know, for example, in India, there is a National Skills Development Corporation, I think it's called, and within that, they have sector skills councils. And I think, you know, this kind of model is also found in different countries, but in India, there is a sector skills council for green jobs. And so, and, you know, they they phrase, and this is, public-private partnerships. So there's the Ministry of Labor, that represents the government, but also the private sector and academia, and others involved. And they have, for example, set skills and competency standards in terms of green jobs. And I think that if you want to grow the green economy, I think these kind of sector skills councils for green jobs will be an important step, and that can be, that perhaps some other countries, of course, doing, but a helpful avenue also. Thanks.
Now, I want to follow up with you on just one aspect of this. I mean, it seems to me that the donors and international multilateral organizations are probably among, at least until the last couple of years, have been among the most enthusiastic supporters of the greening of the youth workforce. Did they get ahead of employers' appetites for green employees? And is there a risk of going too green before the businesses and economies get that green as well? I'd start with you on that question, but I mean, I think all of us who are workforce development practitioners or advisors know that the single most dangerous move in workforce development is to train people for jobs that won't exist when they're trying to make that crucial school-to-work transition. So I'd be curious on your views of where we are in that process, and whether can education systems both be getting ahead of and also behind in some other areas. What's your view on that?
In our research, we find that education systems lag behind, of economic transformations that are taking place. And so currently, there's this transition, a lot of economic transitions or transformations taking place with the digital or the green economy. And so education system lag. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I mentioned it. Really, is a time now. One of the imperatives. The time is now to really to double down, invest more in a combination of skills. And when I say a combination, it's really because time is limited and resources are limited. And so when we make investment, we can't just only think of green skills, for example. I think we need to be able to think broader in terms of the skill sets required to support countries in different economic transformations. Yes, I think you're completely right. I think perhaps international organizations were a bit kind of thinking ahead in terms of some of these policy issues in the green economy. But I think really the urgency is there. We're reaching tipping points, has been highlighted by the IPCC, and so I think it's one of the jobs of international organizations like the ILO to take a look at some of the the main drivers of change happening in the labor markets, and really start to identify the opportunities and have discussions with countries on that, but also identify challenges.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Dr. Basim with this same question. I mean, you have two hats in this world as a project developer and also within it in a novel incubation approach that ends up working, in fact, to provide some of those skills. So what's your perspective on where youth are coming in, what you're needing to provide, and what needs to happen in formal and non-formal education and training to facilitate this transition?
Thank you. I wish I had only two hats, Phil. That would be nice.
You don't have Alex's hat, so.
Yeah, I like that. Actually, I think a bridge needs to be built between academia and the private sector. And I think donor agencies, international NGOs have a role to play here. The challenge is that a lot of the money going to support the young men and women goes to non-governmental or non-for-profit NGOs and academia, ignoring the role of the private sector. I am involved sitting on the board of two private universities in Jordan, and I can feel the need when I sit on those board meetings. I can feel the need for academic designers to listen to what we have to say about modifying academic curricula to match where the market is today and where it's heading. And I like what I'm seeing on the chat, group chat, where several people are confirming the need for everything to be market driven to be sustainable. I think that's an issue that donors should look for. Engage more private sector organizations. It's okay to make money to be able to support young men and women, vulnerable communities. Donors shy away from engaging private sector entities because they don't want us to make money while doing their work. I think that there's a paradigm shift happening. And on that note, I think Jason mentioned that young men and women in the Philippines are moving away from agri. It's the same everywhere. However, I think COVID has stressed the priority of producing in country or in the region because of the supply chain disruptions that took place. In Jordan, we have seen over the past 2 years, reprioritization of agri-food and producing within country of basic commodities, agri products, and some processing. This has been prioritized at all levels from government to private sector to the market itself, because a lot of imports did not make it to Jordan during the curfews that took place. And that created a market pull and created opportunities that were filled by farmers. And we as a company are engaged in taking many of these farmers through the paradigm shift of conventional, what their parents and grandparents used to grow, using a lot of water, to a unconventional or less conventional, high value crops that use less water and are more efficient. And even if you don't consume them within country, you can export them and use those dollars to import the high water consuming crops. Being engaged at all levels within government, regulatory, and academia, I can tell you that there's a missing link between academic institutions and their ability to change their curricula and what the market really needs. And I think the government has a role to play. Donors, NGOs, international NGOs like the ILO, they all have a role to play. And I'm happy to hear Kikim talk about what you guys are doing with youth organizations, because I think these organizations can start building a bridge. A lot of university students are calling us and wanting to come and join our incubator sessions. And I'm happy to see that, and they're all invited to join because they want to see for themselves what's happening in the market. They go to class, they hear what their educators tell them, but then sometimes they come here and you can see the aha moment when they talk to us about what they've learned and how far it is from what we need in the market. So I think there is a missing link, and I think we all have a role to play in fixing it. Alec?
I just wanted to react to that very quickly. We've all been complaining about how slow other employers, you're the model, you're the opposite example, of course, but how slow other ones are to pick up the need to go green. And I think that all the entrepreneurship programs we've seen, the incubators and accelerators around the world, they're just mushrooming exponentially, and we're creating kind of a time bomb that I think the conventional companies that are refusing to go green, they can hold on for a while, but this is going to create a tidal wave of new ideas and so on against them. I just wish it would happen even faster, but I think it's going to be a potent force when we talk about the youth in there.
So it seems like there's some consensus, and although Jessamine hasn't had a time to mention what's the incubator that you're running in, or rather the accelerator that you're running in the Philippines as well?
It's across the globe, Phil. It's called Shelter Tech Accelerator Program.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
It's really supporting startups, and most of them are run by youth, and they do introduce very disruptive and green business models to shake up the construction industry, so to speak.
So we need to be focusing not only on education programs, but also on the critical role of youth entrepreneurship in bringing this forward. We are getting some reminders to move directly into a more Q&A, although I do have to say that the number of questions coming in is relatively small. We've got a couple key ones that I think we'll address in a moment, but I want to ask to anyone who would like to address this, we do need to talk a little bit about data, about labor market information data, about definitional data, about data that allows us to track this emerging green economy better. We've heard about some of the limitations and the differences in directions, but I'd like to ask the general question, especially focusing to Alec, to Key, and to Titar, I guess. What kind of data is needed to track the evolution of green job opportunities for youth. How well are our traditional sector and subsector-based data systems meeting these challenges? And to Alec and Key also, how can information on emerging opportunities be effectively communicated to youth and their families? So any of you who would like to kind of address this data question, I think this would be an interesting, if brief, direction for us to discuss. Who would like to take a stab at that? What needs to change to get the data and then to get it to the people who need it to make their better decisions?
Hi, Phil, if I can very quickly. So, I think, getting the data on the green economy is actually pretty complicated. At the ILO, we have the International Conference for Labor Statisticians. And so since, 2004, in fact, in 2013, or around, I think 2013, they actually issued some guidelines on, for example, measuring green jobs, but it's not easy. I mean, it takes everything from, you need a combination of establishment surveys, of companies, of enterprises, but also household surveys. And, I think Alec had mentioned this beginning, and so you need to use that data, for example, and also data from social accounting matrices or input-output tables. And so there's a range of data that is required. Let me just, I think, and so, everything from very simple things from employment, by occupation, by employment, by industry. I think those are the standard ways to go. But I think it's also important to, as we collect green jobs data, because, as part of because I want to emphasize a green transition, that we also collect the data, but disaggregate that data by, for example, through marginalized groups or by age or by gender, so that we are able to capture. And this is, of course, for countries that want to promote, just transition, in order to be able to monitor that transition. Just, more simple kind of employment data. Of course, that's a baseline, but also we need to go beyond that and be able to disaggregate by age or by sex or by disabilities, for example. In terms of getting this information out, I think Alec, in fact, has mentioned the social accounting matrix, and these provide a basis for employment projections. I think, countries like in the US, my own country in Korea, in fact, they do have, for example, these based on SAMs or input-output models, they have like 10-year projections, for example, on green jobs. And so that is very helpful to countries, including to career advisors when they go talk to students and as such. But we have to remember, like in developing countries, such, for example, SAMs or input-output tables, they're either non-existent, where they exist, they're very old. And so again, we need to be able to work with developing countries in order to support them in being able to assess some of these issues. Thanks.
Yep. Any other thoughts on this? One of the things that, go ahead. I'll just mention there was a question that came out of the chat. Someone has asked whether specific credentialing strategies, maybe badging or other skill-focused credentialing, micro-credentials. And I wonder if that also might have a role in understanding how many people are getting the skills that they need in terms of measuring transparently the level of credential issuance and perhaps the productivity of those credentials among employers. So I'd just like to interject that from the chat. But Alec, you wanted to elaborate on the data question.
Yeah, no, just to, Keith, you're absolutely right. The data, I'm glad to hear about Korea, and I'd love to take a closer look at that. But even if the OECD countries are so far behind in implementing these new data definitions and actually funding surveys and so on, how long is it going to be before we have practical information that we can use in developing countries? It's going to be a while. So I think, from that perspective, I think we're going to have to hunker down and do a lot more of these bottom-up approaches, developing cases, working in clusters and value chains and so on, and making it work at that level, because at the data level, it's going to be very hard to be able to monitor progress anytime soon, I'm afraid. Sure.
Very difficult when the same industry may have companies that are incredibly committed to and other companies that are resisting greening. to see, dropping down to the firm level or the meso level, the cluster level may in fact be more responsible. But let's stay with this data.
Resisting. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, you're saying private sector too, but government's resisting just putting in this relatively small amounts of money necessary to collect the data.
So we have a matrix here of some key institutional challenges. When it comes to getting the information out to young people, Titar, do you have any thoughts on how better information on these new opportunities can be effectively communicated to youth and their families? I mean, how do you think youth can learn best about these opportunities, about emerging green opportunities?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. For this question, I think today is the age of the internet and technology. So I think it would be the most relevant to be because right now I'm not sure what it is for, very little for the job readiness skills and things like that. So and also it's very rare that the university and the school and education system play a role in disseminating the information about these kinds of opportunities. So one way that we could effectively reach to young people would be through the internet and the media that are mentioned. I think I should also mention about a digital, I have to say, because developing country like in developing country like Myanmar, we have like is only a few having access to these kinds of technology and the internet. So to cover that kind of gap, I think we should also take into consideration of the role of the schools and university as well. In my idea is that for people who do not have the access to the internet and technology, I think it is the best if the information about these kinds of opportunities can be disseminated through the schools and university and the education system. It would be the best. It would also be the best if environmental education or the job readiness skills training can also be incorporated into the education system as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
So that's a clear incorporation into the formal education frameworks. I think that's a great segue, however, into this question. Christy put a question out some time ago that I think actually picks up nicely on a theme we wanted to explore, but let's use her framing. I wanted to ask how youth are co-creating the future of green jobs. Christy has asked, what's the role of youth-led organizations and businesses in bringing awareness to the private sector on the idea of triple bottom line or the importance of green considerations in their business model? I think that's a great question. And I'm also curious about other routes to youth agency in this emerging future. And I'll leave this open to anyone who would like to take the first stab. So is it youth serving organizations? Is it incubators? What are the different roles of youth and youth serving organizations or youth organizations in this? Dr. Basim?
Thank you, Phil. Look, I don't think there is lack of value from youth organizations. I think they have a lot of value to bring. The problem is with the listening side. The problem is with governments, legislators, regulators, listening to what they have to say. They really know what they're talking about. And I've been engaged with many local and regional organizations led by youth. And, I'll give you another example. I've been asked to go present the issue of climate change to third graders in my in my kids' school. I was very surprised to hear questions from third graders that are scientific, that talk to the threat of climate change, that talk to what we need to do to alleviate those threats, etc. So when you talk about young men and women in their 20s being organized, you can imagine how big their value is if we listen to them. The challenge is that we're not listening. The challenge is that we're not reflecting what they are telling us on legislations, regulations, policies, strategic plans. I'm talking about at least developing countries. I know it's probably better at OECD countries, but it's an issue that we really have to address.
Other thoughts on youth agency, youth serving organizations bringing awareness to the mainstream, to each other? Do any of your organizations partner with specifically youth serving or youth focused organizations that might be good models in how this is playing out and raising awareness? Seems like we may have a knowledge gap. Titar, what's your view on youth organizations and their role in bringing this along?
Yes, Bill. I think it's such a good thing that we see that a lot of youth organizations today are working on the awareness raising about a certain issue, including the employment and stuff. And also, it's also good to see that they are also working on some kinds of youth empowerment programs, which is really good and helpful for us for the young people who do not have like who do not have like an environmental education incorporated into their education system is very useful. But one more thing is that yeah, it's good that they are organizing such kinds of program. But one more thing is that the youth also need to have like on-job training, real life trainings, and to allow them to learn from the real situation. So it would be really nice if they can also give opportunities like that for the young people, because most of the programs that I'm seeing are like they give you like knowledge and academic knowledge, but not really like on ground. They may not really can give you like on ground experience. So it would be nice if the youth organizations can cover that gap, so that they in the future, if they can really cover that gap and they can really be better.
Dr. Basim, could I ask you to talk just for a minute about the incubation program that you sponsor? I think it's perhaps a great model. And you know, I think that there's this real question. There may be an assumption packed into some of these questions that we're looking at youth serving NGOs or youth serving. But it sounds to me like a lot of the energy here is with incubation, acceleration, and what Alec has referred to as a coming wave of green businesses in the future. And so I think this session is clearly pushing us to broaden our thinking about what a youth serving organization is, right? You might not consider accelerators or incubators to be youth serving organizations a priori. And also what kind of impact we're looking at in terms of jobs versus entrepreneurial. Dr. Basim, I want to give you just a couple of minutes to talk about your model, and then we're going to need to move to some closing remarks and wrap up.
Thank you, Phil. Look, I go back to the idea that there's a gap we need to bridge, and we've identified this a couple of years ago. What we have is a model that brings in mainly vulnerable men, young men and women. And we take them through 4 stages. We start with a selection process that looks at the things I discussed, you know, being passionate about change, wanting to make something of themselves, having some skills, mainly soft skills, even if they don't have the technical skills, that's fine. Then taking them through 2 kinds of education related to climate action. And in our case, that's renewable energy, energy efficiency, service provision, agri and agri-food industry skills, etc., and educating them on the value of market-driven business planning and execution. And then we take them through a more practical training by taking them to the field. So we take them to solar PV manufacturing facilities, to PV farms. We take them to actual farms, food processing facilities. We teach them what it would take to run a business by putting them in front of CEOs that have gone through what they should be going through. And then we sit with them and we develop with them business plans, and we put them in front of potential investors to pitch those business plans. Out of 100, I can tell you that we have been able to get a 15 to 20% success rate by using this model. It's a bit higher than the normal 5% for any startup. So we're happy to see that this is really working, especially when you look at where these people are coming from and how frustrated they are at the beginning and how energetic and happy they are when they see the first check being cut for their new startup. So there's a lot we can do as private sector companies. And by the way, this is a non-for-profit thing that we're doing, just so you know, as a company. It's very important for us to see this work because we as a company are passionate about fighting climate change and about making it work, hopefully, in Jordan and beyond, if this works.
Fantastic. And then really the question then becomes how scalable are these models that can work with a few companies at a time? And I think that scalability question really is going to get us to the transition to the end of this session. I would like to just ask any of you to spend literally 20 to 30 seconds if there's one point that you'd like to revisit in terms of how we get to scalable solutions. Not a full key takeaway, just a couple of, is there any burning desire before we move into wrap up?
Try some clusters.
Okay, try some clusters. So these meso level interventions are really where it's at. Well, we're trying to get the data together and that's scalable. It's been scaled before. Thank you, Alec. Anybody else?
Yes,
I'd like to say, so sorry, go ahead, Keith.
So very quickly, so I think that, you know, in the United States, I think back in the New Deal, they had the civilian core of the civil, but so I think similar initiatives can be undertaken in different countries. So, and already are being undertaken through public works. I think, as in the case of India, these public works, in terms of protecting and conserving the environment, can be scaled up to provide a guarantee, in fact, an employment guarantee for youth.
Right.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, that's all we got time for. Next. Sorry, Keith.
I'm just going to say, I would like to urge donor agencies and international NGOs on this call to rethink about what didn't work and try new things, because I think we need to start engaging private sector more. We need to look at the gap and start bridging it between the abilities and extreme energy that is there with the young and governments. And if we can bridge that, that would be big.
That's great. All right. Any last thoughts? Okay, I want to thank all of you for your participation. I'm just going to move quickly into a recap slide. Now, I've been asked to speak specifically about what can be scaled here. Now, using this scale up, scale out, and scale deep model, we've heard that in terms of things that need to be changed at the institutional policy and rules level, we need clear targets and transition plans. We need a skills system that keeps up with transitions and opening to private sector leadership and youth entrepreneurship. And big scale public works models are all areas where scale ups are possible and imperative. Scale outs might include replicable skill development models, including the one we heard about from the Philippines that blends online, offline learning, and crucially incubation and acceleration models like green tech and shelter tech, as well as cluster level activities. And scale deep, how do we change relationships, cultural values, beliefs, and change the hearts and minds? And how do we scale this way? Through employer attitudes to youth and to greening, through expanding thinking about green jobs, and getting more specific at the same time. So I think there's going to be a paradox here. How much do we expand? How much do we narrow? And then a mindset shift, not blue or white collar jobs or brown collar jobs, but green collar jobs, a scalable change in our thinking, and how governments and systems can learn to listen to youth. So I think there's plenty of room for strategies for scaling all the way across this spectrum. I will share this out with Making Sense. Feel free to screenshot this in the next 12 seconds. before I thank all of our panelists for an excellent, balanced and thought-provoking discussion and turn the floor back over to our hosts from Making Sense, with apologies for running a minute over.
Great. Thank you, Phil, for moderating such a great conversation. Really, from the chats, we see how engaged everyone was. To our speakers, Titar, Dr. Basim, Jess, and Alec and Key, fantastic. For me, it was great to have Titar kick things off from a youth perspective. I think highlighting the importance of getting the right green job skills was a theme. How can young people get and stay in jobs? I think the insights about the importance of data and skills, not just green, but digital and soft skills, the passion, emotional skills and attitude, keeping in mind, as Key mentioned, the education systems lag behind the market. So important to double down on this combination of technical and soft skills for green and other market-driven jobs now. And I think maybe Alec, the last piece he mentioned about the importance of getting youth-led, youth-focused organizations involved in this work. I think the panel maybe acknowledge maybe a gap here, and I think GYEO 2030 is certainly here to help elevate young people and youth voice. So a fantastic real session. Appreciate everyone. Maybe if we go to our slide here, last slide, just the events that we have coming up. We welcome everyone to please join us this week. We have several interesting sessions, and then next week there's some associated sessions as well. If you go to our last slide, you can find everything on our website, gyeo2030.org, for more details about what we're doing in our events. So again, thanks to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days, your evenings, your nights. Thank you again.